guys, I'm Reagan. I'm the founder of Vaer watches, and today I'm going to be taking a very introductory look at water resistance ratings in wristwatches. Now, you'd think it's something that would be very simple. Is this watch waterproof or is it not? But as it turns out, things are actually a lot more complicated than that, and it has a lot to do with kind of the rating scale and judging different levels of resistance across watches. In this video, I'm going to break down the full scale, looking at the total spectrum of watches on sale today, from completely not waterproof at all up to ultra waterproof and essentially unbreachable. So I'm going to break down the different steps along that scale, provide some context of what you can and cannot do with those ratings, and also at the end of the video hopefully provide some additional context on some things you might want to look out for or keep in mind when shopping for a watch for the water that go beyond simply looking at water resistance ratings. So without further ado, let's jump right in and start at the very bottom of the scale. The category I would like to consider like the leaks like a sieve category of watches. Let's jump right into that. Now, at the very bottom of the scale, you're going to find watches that are typically rated to 10 meters or even 30 meters of water resistance. And I know what you're thinking. That sounds perfect. That sounds very sufficient. Very rarely have I been swimming below 30 meters or even 10 meters for that matter. That's over 33 feet. The challenge, and one of the reasons why this is so confusing and why water resistance in general is this really hard thing, I think for new people into watches to kind of wrap their head around, is that these ratings, for a wide variety of reasons, are wildly inaccurate. And so that if you pick up a 1 ATM watch, which represents 10 meters of water resistance, it will probably flood in the desert. It's so fragile and so incapable of withstanding moisture. Now, why that actually is, it's a little complicated. Traditionally, the explanation is that these watches are tested in a static and in controlled environment. So, minor variability in real-world situation when you're actually submerged in water creates differences. Probably the more accurate explanation of why 10 meter and 30 meter watches, 1 ATM, 3 ATM watches are not what they're cracked up to be has a lot to do with Chinese manufacturing. Now, the reason I say that is not because Chinese case factories can't create really water resistant watches. They can. I'm sure that there are a lot of awesome 30, 40, even 100 ATM watches on the market where the cases and pretty much every component is produced in China. So it's nothing against Chinese manufacturing in general, but it is something to be aware of when you're shopping for a 3 ATM or, God forbid, a 1 ATM watch that is manufactured in China. Mostly because this type of watch, this 3 ATM Chinese-made watch, is kind of associated with cheap quality. It's kind of what the fashion watch brands like Daniel Wellington and the many clones of them have made their reputation on. And I can say from personal experience, having seen and tested some of those watches, how they withstand water and splashing and steam, they don't stand up very well. So 3 ATM, it is a bit confusing, and to add on to that, you may even find that in very high-end watches, say from Patek Philippe, for example, their Calatrava, a $30,000 watch or even more, depending on the model, is rated to 3 ATM. So it can be a little bit confusing. My general sentiment on the matter is that if it's a luxury Swiss brand or German brand or whatever it may be, their 3 ATM rating is probably a little bit more accurate and reflective of kind of real world usage, and probably can withstand very brief submersion or splashing. When it comes to Chinese manufacturing in general, that 3 ATM rating is not going to cut it. No swimming, no splashing, submersion, and steam is going to be a big issue. That's something that you're probably going to see if you do choose to invest in that type of watch. All right, guys, so moving right up the ladder, right after 3 ATM, traditionally we're going to find watches rated to 5 ATM, or in other words, 50 meters of water resistance. This is a very, very common rating, particularly in the affordable quartz segment. A lot of field watches that you're going to be shopping particularly those under $100 or even under $200, are often going to, show that 5 ATM rating. Now, 5 ATM to me is really the most complicated and kind of hard to determine rating in terms of what it exactly means. Mostly because it does indicate an investment. It does indicate maybe superior gaskets and a little bit of, better engineering on terms of the case design over your 3 ATM watches. So brands that are offering that, they've put in a little bit of effort. The reason why it's challenging is oftentimes that 5 ATM watch is really going to ultimately fail in real world water usage. And that's where, I always kind of question that fact of, particularly in field watches or outdoor watches, it's like, well, why didn't you just take it, a little bit further and get that 10 ATM or higher rating just to ensure that water resistance is more or less guaranteed. But regardless, a lot of watches do offer this 5 ATM, and what you can pretty much kind of assume or guess in terms of what your watch is going to be capable of is probably similar to an iPhone or a smartphone. It's something that you definitely don't want to drop in the water, but chances are if you do, it should be okay, assuming it's not extended submersion or extreme conditions. So essentially the 5 ATM watch is going to provide some degree of accident coverage, but it's definitely not going to be the option that you're going to want if you're planning to take your watch in true water activities. For that, you need to go one step further up the ladder in terms of the ratings, and that would be at the 10 ATM scale. 10 ATM is really kind of that entry point into true waterproof capability. I obviously do waterproof in brackets because it's increasingly hard from legal purposes and otherwise to say that this watch can withstand water in all conditions. However, for all intents and purposes, 10 ATM is where that kind of conversation starts to begin. And by that, it essentially means you can start swimming in it. You can start surfing, diving, you can spend hours in the water with your watch and you should be good to go. That's what 10 ATM guarantees. And the numbers are getting bigger and bigger. This is 100 meters of water resistance, again, at static pressure. But for the most part, in terms of everything that we've researched and seen, that 100 meters of static and lab tested pressure should cover you to about 30 to 40 feet of real world depth exposure. So that's something to keep in mind. And that's quite deep for any type of recreational activity. Now, the one caveat that I would add on when speaking about 10 ATM watches is the importance of a locking screw-down crown. Here at Vaer, it's something that we offer on all of our watches and have always offered on our watches. And the reason for that is with a 10 ATM watch, with a traditional push-pull crown, there's always that risk that, due to either user error or accident or, simply, hitting a big wave and knocking your watch against your surfboard or against your kayak or whatever it is, there's always that opportunity for that crown to become disengaged. And that offers like an incredible amount of risk, particularly when you've invested in an expensive watch. Because essentially, that open crown is going to make your 10 ATM watch about as water resistant as a 1 ATM watch. It's going to flood instantly, and you're going to be in a whole lot of trouble. The locking crown essentially ensures that doesn't happen. The crown is on a threaded set of screws and you're literally screwing it in and tightening the gaskets against each other and making sure that water's never getting into that weak point of the watch. So for me, and the way I would recommend, looking at watches is 10 ATM is that starting point. 10 ATM with a locking screw-down crown is really kind of that area of confidence and comfort when it comes to being in the water. And I speak from very personal experience, obviously running the brand and putting watches out into the world and ensuring that they're working and that customers are happy, but even from personal experience. The watch I have on my wrist, it's no coincidence that I was wearing this for this video, has been my personal everyday watch for the last 8 or 9 months now. And the band itself, the NATO band, has taken some wear and tear, but this watch is, I'm in the ocean just about every day. Particularly over the summer, I was in the ocean every day. And so this watch has logged at least 200 hours, maybe 300 hours of intense, surf and ocean conditions. The band is faded, it's starting to get pretty worn down, but the watch itself is, almost as good as new. There's a few kind of rough scuffs, and right now I was in the ocean yesterday, so there's a little bit of salt water buildup, but if I was to wash this with soap and water, it would clean up and look fantastic. It's kept perfect time, it stayed dry, and it really is as simple as that. So really, speaking from, again, personal experience and the experience of our customers, that locking crown is going to enable you to take that watch in the water every single day and, 3-4 hours at a time, or as long as you want to stay in the water. This is the type of watch that you're going to need for that. Moving beyond 10 ATM with a locking crown starts to get into a very complicated conversation when it comes to water resistance. And I say that because, we have confidence, as I mentioned, that our 10 ATM watch is essentially waterproof for 99% of, real world activities. The question is, how many people out there are going to be operating in that 1%? Obviously, there are people who are doing that. There are, people who are casual or recreational deep divers taking their watches to 60 meters, for example. Although it's in pretty rare activity, and it's one of those things that's more decorative, because really at that depth, you're definitely going to want to dive computer. So is it cool? Definitely. Is it something that the average person needs in order to be in the water? It is not. Certainly it's not. However, when we get into the conversation of dive watches, that's really where we start looking at 20 ATM and beyond. So here we have the first 20 ATM Vaer watch, which is the D5, and there's also the D7 Swiss-made version of the diver. We basically wanted to take this model and create, which a lot of brands obviously do, create that kind of professional grade, or that one step above, what you might get at the 10 ATM. It's really, again, operating in that 1%, that kind of special use case. But obviously, that's an exciting concept to a lot of people. And traditionally within watches and life in general, the bigger numbers are exciting and, sell things. So bigger numbers are good, I guess. The reason why, in my opinion, and the way we've kind of approached the diver and looking at it, is that 20 ATM is a great compromise, because it does give you an elevated level, probably creates a level of confidence in real world activities. It's 99.9%. So unless you're some sort of, I don't even know what the job is, but like the underseas welder or something, working in a diving bell or something. Other than those people, which there's probably a few dozen of them in the entire United States, this watch is going to cover you in the water. And for that reason, I think it's the perfect sweet spot for a dive watch, because you can have slimness, you can have the super cool exhibition case back, and it's also just something that you actually would want to have on your wrist when you're in the water, because it's not super bulky, it's not too heavy. So that's where kind of 20 ATM operates, and for us, for Vaer as a brand, it's probably the outer limits of where we want to take things in terms of what we're offering. Main reason, again, is that I have the opportunity to take our diver in the ocean and have it as my daily watch when I'm surfing, but I choose not to. I would much rather have the small 36 millimeter quartz, which is light, compact, and honestly quite comfortable on my wrist when I'm actually doing an in-water activity. Maybe divers feel differently, I'm not sure, but this watch, with that 20 ATM, there's heft to it, there's weight, there's trade-offs, and I think that's something that all watch buyers should be cognizant of, particularly those that actually are serious about spending a lot of time in the water. Now, getting beyond 20 ATM, this is kind of getting to the upper echelons, the outer reaches of practicality and to some degree, but it's also kind of getting into the realm of true engineering achievement. While it's not something that is particularly interesting for us at Vaer, because we approach our watches as kind of everyday essentials, everyday items, something that you can wear in almost in all conditions. I think when you really start to get into that higher rating scale, it's more numbers for numbers' sake. You get into the helium escape valves and real bulk, real heft on your wrist, and I think those watches are awesome. I think certain people pull that off, and I think there's a really cool idea of collecting ultra water resistant watches. Nothing wrong with that. However, it's just something that we're likely not to explore. I know Rolex recently, or a few years ago, did I think it was 100 ATM watch that's like over $1,000 meters of resistance. And there's a lot of others, obviously, that are out there with big and outrageous claims. And you know, it's a good way of generating press and whatnot. However, I think for the average buyer, that's probably not what you're going to need, and it's kind of no longer about water resistance at that point. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers it. Obviously, we could go into a much deeper dive, no pun intended, into water resistance ratings, but I think that kind of gives a very introductory overview of how that kind of rating scale works, from, you know, not resistant at all up to ultra resistant. Again, kind of the key takeaways is that ATM, which stands for atmosphere, is a stand-in for, you know, kind of meters of depth resistance. You know, 1 ATM equals 10 meters of resistance, although not really. So maybe this is still confusing, but hopefully by watching this video, you have a little bit of an understanding of exactly kind of where you want to go in terms of your purchase. Again, my recommendation is always at that kind of sweet spot in the middle of the scale, which is that 10 ATM with a screw down crown. Obviously, that's most of the types of watches that we sell at Vaer. So if you are interested, obviously our site is a good place to start, but there are other brands out there that are offering a similar spec list. So you should check those guys out as well. Hopefully this was useful. We'll probably be doing more videos on, you know, taking our watches in extreme conditions and kind of showing off just how these kind of things work in different activities. Again, thanks for watching. Hope it was useful, and we'll see you again soon.